That would be awesome. Excellent. Okay. So this is Leading with Empathy and Allyship. I am your host, Melinda Briana Epler. This is a live event and podcast series where we work to build inclusive, at Change Catalyst, we work to build inclusive innovation through consulting, training, and events. In this series, Leading with Empathy and Allyship, we go deep and we get real, building empathy for historically underrepresented and marginalized people, and provide tangible, actionable steps we can all take to be better allies and better advocates for each other. This is a little bit different today. We are going to be discussing becoming a great ally, and I'm going to talk with you solo. So please go ahead and keep chatting away in the chat here. Let me know what's resonating for you. Obviously be inclusive and in that chat, of course. We have on screen a couple of ASL interpreters today. As I mentioned earlier, thank you again to Interpreter Now for your great partnership. We appreciate you and your sponsorship. Also, this is being live captioned by Maggie at White Coat Captioning. So down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if you want to turn on captioning, just click close caption and it should come on there. You can also change the size of the text there as well. Thanks to our team, Renzo, Sally, and Antonia, who are working behind the scenes. They'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A throughout our time. And yeah, please chat away. Hey, Brian, good to see you all. Please introduce yourself if you're just joining, and let me know what's resonating. Use the Q&A function. I will take some questions at the end. So go ahead and use your Q&A, use the Q&A for that so I can find them easily. And I think we will just go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do this a little bit differently and share my screen, share some slides this time too. The captioning service is Interpreter Now. And maybe Antonia or Sally or Renzo, you could put the link in the chat. I could just ask that. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I just got a pop-up that that my audio is not working. So anybody, if you can't hear me in the chat, let me know. Otherwise, I will just keep going. All right. I guess if you can't hear me, then you can't let me know. But thank you, Julie. I appreciate it. All right. So I'm going to talk about becoming a great ally, and it's a journey. You know, we're all on this journey, and the way we get there is different, and also it's different in 2020. We're definitely in a different place right now in this moment, and a good opportunity to really step up for each other in a unique way. So as you all know, I'm the founder and CEO of Change Catalyst. We build inclusive innovation globally, and my background is a combination of storytelling, systems design, community building, and behavior change. And that's kind of how I approach all of the work that I do. In 2014, my partner, Wayne Sutton, and I set out to change the tech industry. The two of us had been working with startups. We'd been working to create social impact and diversity and inclusion for a long time. And we decided that we really wanted to impact the industry overall. So right before I started Change Catalyst, I was an executive in marketing and culture, and I found myself in a very non-inclusive environment. And I was miserable. I was a one woman and a leadership team of 19, and I worked to create change in that company, but I realized I wanted to do more. I wanted to make an impact in the tech industry. So I left my job as an executive and founded Change Catalyst. We have a series of events called Tech Inclusion, which we've done around the world. and then also consulting, startup programs, events, and we've worked with over 450 tech companies and venture capital firms and other tech ecosystem builders to create change. So here's kind of a bit about our work and our impact across the world. And, you know, because we're virtual right now, we're actually able to really impact people in different places that we never would have in the past. I know there's folks joining here today. I can see there are folks joining here today from all around the world. So that is one benefit of going virtual. So here we are in 2020. I'm going to jump right in here and take a moment to acknowledge where we are today. And take a deep breath. We're working to come to terms with 400 years of systemic racism and injustice in the United States and really around the world. This is a global problem. And it's globally, we need to address it. Many lives have been lost this year, as well as over the last several hundred years. Racism is a global problem dating back to colonialism, which has touched many parts of our world. So I want to just take a very quick moment here to just acknowledge this place that we are in right now. And the lives that have been lost, and honoring their living years. So if you don't know, this is actually on babynames.com. Each of these names was somebody's baby, is what it says. The reality is that it hasn't been very long since people were enslaved in this country and then segregated for another 100 years. People alive today, parents and grandparents, they lived as enslaved people. They lived in segregation. They lived in areas where they couldn't use the same bathrooms and water fountains, and sat at the back of the bus and were forced to attend different schools that were not equal, still not equal today, and weren't allowed to do many of the things that many of us take for granted. And we are still unfolding this. We are still recovering from this. We are still repairing from this. We're not yet recovered. We're not yet repaired. And it has only been a generation. We have lots of work to do. So at the very basic level, Black lives matter. And we must fight for that to be true. In our neighborhoods, in our lives, in our workplaces, we must fight for that to be true. And also Black thriving matters. It's up to all of us to work together to create much needed change. And that is a combination of some really hard things. And I appreciate you all being on here today and talking about this and working through this. It takes recognizing our own privilege, and we are all privileged to be here. There is some privilege that each of us has to be in the space in this moment right now. It also takes looking internally in what needs to change, and then looking externally at how we use our power and our privilege to create change. And as a white woman in the United States, I do have a good amount of privilege, and there's a lot I can do to advocate for change, to become anti-racist, to advocate for anti-racist systems and cultures. And it's my job. It's my job as an ally to speak up, to step up, to work to create change. This is doing the internal work, finding our own access points into allyship and digging deep into our motivations for doing this work, and doing our own healing if we have also faced barriers and discrimination, which most of us have. And is really, that healing is so important. We talked a bit about this with Michael Thomas. If we don't work to heal ourselves, we'll likely harm each other, even if we don't intend to. So there's a lot of focus on external solutions right now. There's a lot of emphasis on external solutions, making a statement via social media, giving money, protesting against what other people are doing. And all of that is very important. It's all good, it's all important. And we're missing something big if we don't work to create that big change inward. We have to re-examine ourselves, and then we have to re-examine how we do our work and how we show up in our lives, in our workplaces. So Ibram X. Kendi said, The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it's anti-racist. One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between safe space of not racist. So Amy Cooper in Central Park said she wasn't racist, right? If we don't do that work internally, if we don't do that work to become anti-racist, we risk harming others. We live in a world where many people have unearned power and privilege. I do because I am white. I live in the United States. I work in the tech industry. And now is the time, it's always been the time, but now is the time to use our power and privilege to create change so that our Black colleagues and friends and neighbors have opportunities to live, to love, and to thrive. And we can all do better, but we have to work at it. We have to take action. I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but if you find yourself resisting to anything, denying privilege, when I first heard the word privilege, I didn't like it, didn't want to deal with it. I cast it aside, and over the years I have worked inside myself, understood, kind of gone deep, right? To understand why was I resisting that? So if you are resisting, go deep into why. Because millions of people are sharing their experiences right now, and it's time to listen to them. It's time to act. So this is not charity. This is correction. This is reparation. This is, in this country, recognizing for hundreds of years, we have been wrong and caused irreparable harm. We didn't, as you saw in that graphic, we didn't go from freeing people who were enslaved to complete equality. We have gone through a series of changes in our lives, in our society, and we're still working on that. So who is underrepresented? In the tech industry, in many other industries, lots of people are underrepresented or face barriers and discrimination. Women and people who are non-binary, so people who don't necessarily identify as a woman or as a man. Racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA, people with disabilities, veterans, and in tech, and in many other industries, there is an age discrimination as well. In tech, it's people over age 35, and many others. And humans are intersectional. So one person can actually have all of these identities. So what is the root of that? Why are people underrepresented? People are underrepresented because of historical privilege and oppression, because of systemic inequities, because of personal biases, because of cultural marginalization, whether that's popular culture or that's workplace culture. These are big weighted terms that do make people uncomfortable. That's a part of this. It's a part of allyship, right? Is getting uncomfortable because we need to address them. Until a couple of weeks ago, this is actually a slide that it was hard to put up, and I had to fight sometimes to really talk about these issues in companies that we worked with because people didn't want to talk about it. But here we are in a different world where we can talk about it. So let's talk about it. And 2020 is a case study in this. So where some people are, living through hardships, we're all going through a lot in 2020. There is no question. And yet some people are going through a lot more. COVID hits Black and Indigenous people by far the hardest. And now we're seeing Latinx folks as well. Asian people are facing anti-Asian racism and xenophobia. People are losing their jobs during the pandemic, and they're disproportionately Black and Latinx folks. Shelter in place is very hard on people with disabilities, people with mental illness, people in abusive relationships, and parents and other caregivers. And then behind the scenes, we still have lots of immigration issues. We still have ICE camps and immigrants fearful of their lives, their safety and visa status. And then the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many more is shining the spotlight on 400 years of racism. And Black friends and colleagues are living and reliving trauma regularly right now. For the first time, Lots of folks are also speaking out publicly and exploring racism and discrimination and microaggressions and macroaggressions that that people have had to live with for a long time. It's a lot, and it's our collective problem to fix. How this affects the workplace, how this shows up in the workplace, the historical privilege and oppression, it turns into the schools we have access to, the education, the networks that give us jobs or don't because of who we are and where we grew up, the discrimination we face throughout our lives that plays a role in propelling us or not throughout our careers. The systemic inequities, they play into hiring processes that were designed for certain types of people and perhaps not others, and that as a result leads to pattern matching and leads to us continuing to seek people that look like us in those roles. And when we don't actively investigate and redesign these, we perpetuate biases and discrimination. Pay equity, promotion equity, where some people are paid more than others based on biases, based on their networks and social cues that get them those rates and that promotion. Personal biases, how those play a role in hiring and promotions, who's assigned to stretch assignments, who's assigned to those assignments that propel us to the next place in our career. Even how we conduct meetings can make a difference in how people show up or don't show up and really thrive in those meetings that can have lasting effects. And then the cultural marginalization. Cultural marginalization can lead to bullying, can lead to harassment, exclusion, tokenism, othering, microaggressions and macroaggressions, and all of those take a toll, whether they're happening inside of the workplace or outside of the workplace. When you come upon bullying, microaggressions, and some of these other discrimination and other things that I just talked about, what happens in that moment is you can actually have an amygdala hijack, and that's a physical response in your brain that produces a fight, freeze, or flight response. That it looks differently in different people. For me, I often freeze. Sometimes I fly, and it's really all I can think about. It takes over my brain, and over time, it can have long-term effects. There are several studies out there now that show that there are long-term biological effects, cognitive effects, emotional and behavioral effects of that continued stress from just microaggressions. And so add to that the daily stress of racism and discrimination, like we're seeing in the news almost daily, and many people are experiencing regularly, and you begin to see a pattern of health issues and emotional trauma, psychological trauma, physical trauma that can affect people's lives long term. And Daryl Wing Sue, if you all haven't seen anything that Daryl Wing Sue has done, we will, after this episode, share a link to some of the work so you can check it out. There's a lot of great studies that they've done. So all of this can change you. All of the things that we just talked about can lead to imposter syndrome, that feeling that I don't belong here in this place, that I don't have the expertise to really be my best self in front of you all, for example, and stereotype threat, that feeling that I'm playing into stereotypes of people who look like me, covering a piece of myself as I come to work every day, code switching, being somebody different that I am at home versus at work, lack of productivity, and then health issues that we just talked about. And the other things that can happen are a numbness and a distancing, a stepping back from your work, a stepping back and not stepping forward. Or even if you don't do that work inside yourself, harassment and bullying of others. So what do? There's no magic wand that corrects this. It's you and me. This is the work right here. It's you and me creating change, one company at a time, one person at a time, one action at a time. In the tech industry, it really, in any industry, we want quick solutions. We want an app, we want a quick training. But those are not going to fundamentally shift this. We are talking about 400 years of racism. We are talking about things that don't change with one app, that don't change with one training. It is little actions, one person at a time, one act at a time, one word at a time. And while our companies do have a responsibility to create those inclusive cultures and to correct systemic inequities, we make a mistake when we see diversity and inclusion as a side project rather than this work inside all of us that we need to do together. And I personally don't believe that we will radically shift diversity, equity, or inclusion until we reach a critical mass of allies, until there are more of us on calls like this, until there are more of us really working and activating ourselves to create change. So allyship is understanding the imbalance and opportunity, the things that I just talked about, and using your power and your privilege to change it. Understanding the imbalance and opportunity and using your power and your privilege to change it. It's recognizing this imbalance and opportunity to live, to love, to thrive, and working to change it. It's really seeing and understanding the person next to us, having that empathy and that understanding and working to understand, and also recognizing there might be somebody missing that should be standing next to us. And first knowing what they're going through and then helping them succeed and thrive with us. And it benefits us all. When we work together to create diverse and inclusive teams, the data shows we'll be happier, more innovative, more productive, and more profitable. And it's also the right thing to do. And everybody has their own access point to this work. So recognize that, use that as your motivation. What is your motivation to create change? And hold on to that. So a couple of years ago, I did a TED Talk on how to be an ally in the workplace. I was asked to do a TED Talk, and the topic they wanted me to talk about was not what I wanted to talk about. So I pushed back and I said, hey, I want to use this platform to make a difference in people's lives and give them some practical things that anybody can do to make a difference for each other. It's had more than 2 million views at this point. It's resonating and that has a ripple effect. And I'm proud of that. And I want to say that it took a long time to get there. It took a long time to know what allyship was. No one was born being a great ally. I spent a lifetime learning how to do it, and I still make mistakes. And those mistakes are essential in allyship because you have to take risks. You have to step forward. And sometimes that means stepping out in an uncomfortable place and maybe not doing it all right. But you learn from that and you apologize if you unintentionally do harm, and then you keep going. So a friend recently asked me to speak at her company and talk about my own story and my own path to allyship. She told me I'd been such a good ally for her, and she wanted me to show her team how to get some ideas for, how to become an ally. And by seeing my story, by hearing my story. And before that, I didn't think about my story as being a part of this very much, but the reality is we all have our own path. We all have our own path to allyship and advocacy. So I am going to do something a little different and talk about my path to get here and how I move through the stages of allyship in the hopes that it can help you kind of understand where you are on that path and some specific actions that you can take. So, as I said, no one is born a great ally. I certainly was not born an ally, though I had a unique childhood that did help me prepare to be one. As a white middle-class girl, I was lucky that I grew up in Oakland and then in South Seattle, both areas that were majority minority. My friends were very diverse, majority minority schools throughout my education. My friends were from around the world, from diverse cultures around the world and across the United States. And I even, just as an example, my first day in my 4th grade school, when I moved to Seattle, the whole school saying, "We shall overcome," right? That was, so I was in a very different spot, and I recognize that than most white people in this country. And there's some interesting statistics around, I think it's 80-something% of white people don't have friends that don't have more than 1 or 2 friends that are non-white, that are not white. So I recognize that I am different. I grew up valuing diversity. I didn't know what that word was. My friends all had unique experiences, and their cultures and unique experiences mattered to me. And I thought it was normal. I thought that the racism we read in textbooks and the novels was in the past. So stages of allyship, often it starts with denial. I was in denial. While I valued diversity, I didn't know there was systemic racism or xenophobia or ableism or bigotry. And it's over many years that I kind of learned those. I was privileged not to know. And it's okay. Many people start here. Most people start here. And the biggest thing when you are here is to look inside yourself and ask why you're denying it, what you're denying, and use that denial of privilege. I spoke earlier of my own privilege and really having to come to terms with that. That privilege was something that I denied for some time. So what is it that you are denying? Are you denying something right now? Or are you past it? So during my first few weeks of college, which was several years ago, I walked through the center of the University of Washington campus in Seattle, and I happened upon a group of Black students talking about the injustices they face daily and working through what they're going to do about it. It stopped me in my tracks. I listened for some time. At first, I was in denial. I said, they're just stirring things up. In my head, I was thinking, they're just stirring things up. They're just, but then I listened more. I sat down, and I'm really grateful that they allowed me to sit down and listen. And that denial turned into anger and frustration. It also turned into sadness and guilt and maybe a little bit of shame. At the same time, around the same time, one of my friends who was Black had just moved to Atlanta and told me that in the South, she was grateful because in the South, at least people are openly racist, unlike Seattle, where it's very covert. It was really hard for me to hear. I was confronted by my own ignorance. I was very wrong, and I didn't understand how I could be so wrong. How do we live in a world that pretends that racism and discrimination is in the past, when the reality is that my colleagues and friends experience it every day? In classrooms, walking down the street, or in a store, getting a job, basic things that I took for granted. We're confronting them every day. So, an observer. I became an observer. I was listening. The why is clear, but I'm not yet participating. I maybe feel excluded from participating because I'm still trying to get it. I'm still trying to really understand what is happening, and I don't necessarily have the words to jump in yet. So then, a learner. I spent the next nine years in college. I took way too many classes because I really wanted to know, how do I create change? I sampled different courses and degrees, learning new perspectives and tools, trying to figure out how I was going to change the world and make it better. I read a lot. I took courses from people with different identities, sharing their experiences and their expertise. I relearned history. I relearned a lot. So learner is not just about learning new things, it's also about relearning the things that we thought we knew. I learned about structural anti-Black racism and how it perpetuates through the structures and cultures in our world. I learned about broken treaties and Native American history and culture. I also learned about Middle Eastern and Latin American history from the point of view of people within those regions. And I ended up with a cultural anthropology degree and did a lot of work in literature as well. Again, so much reading, so much looking at and understanding culture so that I could learn how to change culture. So, in a very circuitous route, I made my way from Seattle to New York to LA and ended up at USC Film School in graduate school. I realized that the film medium could really reach a lot of people through storytelling. And I really wanted to reach as many people as I could to create change. And there I learned how to use storytelling plus behavior science to create change, to change behavior. And I worked in the film industry for about 10 years. I worked on TV shows to pay the bills and documentaries to change the world. And one could argue a few of the TV shows that I worked on, like The West Wing, changed the world in somewhat. I worked on the last season when a Latino was running for president. But the majority of the work that I did around social impact was the documentary work. And I found my way, I had a big break in my career and found my way to a participant media production called Angels in the Dust. It was a mainstream production company founded by Jeff Skoll. He was the first employee and the first president of eBay. And he has used his wealth to create change in a number of ways. Participant media is one of them. Even there, it was a constant battle to have social impact and the real stories. So this movie is about children who are orphans of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in South Africa. And every day I had to fight to make sure that the story was actually about the Black kids living through this HIV/AIDS epidemic and the underlying structural issues, the political backdrop. Instead of the bigger push from producers, from others, to talk about the white people that owned the orphanage and I didn't know this at the time, I didn't know the language around this, but essentially white saviors. They were doing great work, but this story, it was so important to be told from the point of view of the kids that were living through this epidemic, and then also the structural changes. And for 9 months I fought, and I won more than I didn't win everything, but it took a toll physically. I was working 14-hour days, 6 days a week, combined with some harassment in that workplace as well. But looking back in my history, this was a moment for me, a big step for me as an ally. I was advocating for the children's voices and their experiences and those systemic injustices to be at the forefront, to be at the core of the story and the message. And a key point here about allyship, those kids who are now adults, those kids don't even know who I am. And that's not important. What's important is that their lives were told from their point of view, as close as I could get to their point of view. They'll never know, but that's what allyship is all about, is about advocating for people who they may not even be in the room. They were halfway across the country, and that is a key piece of allyship. It's just my moment when I was thinking back, what is the one big moment that really stood out for me in my history? And that was it. That was kind of the beginning of my work in allyship. So from the film industry, I started working with NGOs and educators, academia, and some Fortune 500 companies to increase their social impact with storytelling behavior change campaigns. I had my own company, and then I made my way to become an executive working with tech and with healthcare, working to create change in the healthcare industry at the time. So I was an executive at an international engineering firm. It brought me to San Francisco. It was my dream job and a culmination of all the skills I've acquired over the years, the storytelling, the social impact, the behavior change, the technology. I was head of marketing and culture, and I worked with the nation's largest healthcare systems, using technology, culture change to reduce their energy, water, and waste use, and to improve their social impact. I was really proud of my work, and I was creating real change in the world. And it was also the worst professional experience of my life. I mentioned before, I was one woman in a leadership team of 19, and it was not a culture that was creative for me. While there were bigger issues, most of what happened were little behaviors and patterns that chipped away at my ability to do my work well. They ate away at my confidence and my leadership and my capacity to innovate. Not listened to, not empowered, interrupted, being talked over, being bullied, gaslit. My expertise was questioned regularly, despite the many accomplishments in the work. And when you experience that every day after many months, you kind of start believing it. You can start believing it yourself. Even though I had a track record of success in that workplace, I started to believe that I was ineffective. And I got to a real low point. I started doing some reading. Fortunately, I read an article about toxic workplace cultures and microaggressions, and I kind of started to have this aha moment that it was not me, it was the culture around me that was failing me. And then I started to look at the data, our data in the company, and I realized I was definitely not alone. We had high turnover rates, particularly with women and underrepresented minorities. So I worked to create change at that company. And so an accomplice breaks the rules, they break the law, they dismantle the structures for the benefit of other people. I tried to do that at this company, and this is important. It's not always possible. Sometimes it's just the workplace is not ready. And I fought hard. I really fought to create change, structural change. And it wasn't ready. It was not possible. It hurt me in my own reputation. And so I recalibrated and I started to make changes from the inside instead. I started to do things that were a little bit more covert to create change. And so I think it's important for all of us to understand that sometimes you can be an accomplice and break the rules and dismantle the structures. And certainly there are lots of examples of people doing that outside of the workplace right now in protests where in Portland, for example, when moms are joining arms to protect the protesters. There's a lot of areas where we can do this. Sometimes your workplace is not ready to do this. And so you just need to know, what can you do? Where are you going to have efficacy in creating change? So then I switched. Instead of going the accomplice route, I became an advocate. I worked to create change and use my power and influence to create change, and created some things where I didn't even need to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion that would create change. Because the reality is that wellness programs, mindfulness programs, emotional intelligence work, all of that can work to create change. And you don't even, if you're in a workplace where it's not open to this, you can create change in different ways. So I pushed for change inside that company, and I worked to support underrepresented folks, worked to weed out the deep discrimination and harassment that was happening, and worked to create change that way. So, and then I realized I wanted to do more. I wanted to have an impact on the whole industry, the tech industry. So I left my job as an executive to found Change Catalyst, working to create change in the tech industry. So an activist dedicates their life and their career to create change. Usually that means you take a big career pivot, you take a lot of risk, and you take a big pay cut. And that's just the reality of it. But to me, this is my work. This is more, this is very important to me. So right now I help companies and ecosystem builders and startups to create and address systemic issues, and teach others how to be allies and change makers as well. And so here are the stages of allyship. You can go up and down, and I go vacillate between being an ally, an accomplice, an advocate, an activist, a learner, and all of these things can happen kind of simultaneously, or you can go up and down along this continuum. And it took me much later to become a better ally for people with disabilities, for example. So I was in the learner phase there, where I may have been, a gender activist, a race and ethnicity activist. I was still a learner when it came to understanding people with disabilities and how I could really step up for them. So this is a continuum. So start by doing no harm. That's key, is really understand, and that's the learning, and that's the deep work within yourself. Part of doing no harm, though, is doing something, because doing nothing is harmful. When you don't act, you're actually complicit. So it's not enough to step back and just keep listening and keep observing. Learn the language that people use to describe their identities, know how to pronounce somebody's name, how to describe their disability or religion or ethnicity, understand their pronouns, and use those pronouns. Model that in social media, in Zoom. You know, don't let somebody who is non-binary have to be the only one that identifies themselves. We should all be doing it and normalizing that. And it matters. If you don't know somebody's pronoun, if you don't know how somebody describes their disability identity, ask. It's also important, you know, when we talk about self-identification, not just in pronouns, but also self-identifying in surveys. Because data really matters. And often it's the people in the majority culture who don't give their data in a survey. And what that does is it changes the data in a negative way. That doesn't, we need to recognize that our, you know, data matters for creating change and our role in that. Give me your full attention. So if somebody is speaking, put down your cell phone, close your laptop, pay attention. If they're new, if they're the only person like them in the room, or they're just nervous, it can make a huge difference in how they show up, how they give you their full presence, how they give you a presentation. And I will say, even, you know, even when I can't see you all, the chats are, you know, feeling me. I see what you all are talking about and how it's resonating, and that makes a difference. Don't interrupt. Underrepresented people are more likely to be interrupted. So take a step back and listen. Echo and attribute. Often underrepresented people's ideas are dismissed and brought up by somebody else a few minutes later and championed. So that recognition can make a huge difference in somebody's life. It can be the difference between being promoted or not, right? If they're, if somebody's ideas are attributed to them, that can make a big difference in who even takes that project on, right? That matters. It might be a little thing in the moment, can make a big difference in somebody's career over time. And then listen and learn. Work on your own biases and microaggressions, follow underrepresented people on social media, go to events that you wouldn't normally go to that are created for diverse people, assuming you're welcome. And learn how your words and actions might affect people, and then filter them so they don't. So often when we meet people, we are looking for the commonalities, what we share. But I want to encourage everybody to also really value what what we don't have in common. Really value the differences, and that can make a big difference in hiring, in promotion, in leadership. Really think about what you don't know and how somebody else might add. I'm realizing the time, so I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker. Laura Park, the artist, has a New York Times, big New York Times spread a few weeks ago on her kind of exploration of allyship. Very cool. Michael Thomas mentioned we can do harm to each other if we haven't done our own work. Allies, do your own work. Really important. So number 2 is to advocate for underrepresented people in small ways. Make sure you're approaching everything and really leading with empathy, being a leader who models empathy, and also leading your own approach, leading your own actions with empathy. The best allies I know work internally to know themselves, and then they listen, they learn, and they act with empathy. Ki-Yoon Kim did a study, a photographer, did a study asking her friends at Fordham University to write down an instance of racial microaggression they faced. And if you want to take a look, it's kind of amazing. There's and you can see very quickly just the little things that people hear in their daily lives that can really make a difference and add up in a big way. So allies, they intervene. If you hear microaggressions, if you see microaggressions, you interrupt them. Microaggressions can be verbal and they can also be non-verbal. Body language can make a big difference, whether you close your arms and you're folded in or you're open. That can make a big difference in how somebody perceives your thoughts and your feelings. Avoidance is another one. It's often when we don't know and we don't feel like we know enough about somebody, we can avoid them. So imagine if someone is avoided for their lives. I learned a lot about this from Victor Calise, the commissioner in the mayor's office for people with disabilities in New York. If people are constantly avoiding you because they don't know how to accommodate, if they don't accommodate for your disability, if they don't know how to talk with you about your disability, they might sit further away from you or not decide to interview you or ask different questions, presuppose other hidden disabilities, etc. So avoidance is not the answer. Environmental microaggressions, we're coming to terms with that a lot through mascots, through advertisements, through even office decor, presentations that leave out diverse identities, leadership, and whether a leadership team is diverse, and then of course the police brutality and murder of Black people that we're seeing every day and over again. This is salt in the wounds of marginalized groups in our society. That's a quote from Daryl Wing Sue. So all of this can lead to wearing you down over time. We talked about tokenism a bit, that feeling that you have to you're walking into the room and representing all people like you. And that weight is huge. Stereotype, threat, covering and code switching. And all of this can lead to imposter syndrome and other ways that you kind of start to believe what people are telling you over your lifetime. So, and Daisy talks about this in a past episode, being held back by her own sense of being the only woman in the room, the only person of color, the youngest person in meetings. The difference in power I was very keen on, and also the stereotype threat that many of us feel. If I mess up, then I mess up for everyone behind me. That's a lot of weight. It's a lot of pressure, and it can lock you in. So work to intervene, knowing that people are going through that, move them from that internalizing the lack of power, the lack of feeling power, into feeling power. It happens when you're standing, it happens when you're sitting, it happens when you're speaking. How can you disrupt the power dynamics within somebody's body even, because it can make a huge difference. If you see a whole bunch of people waiting to be interviewed and they're all closed off and nervous and feeling imposter syndrome and all of these other things, how can you disrupt the power dynamics in their bodies before they go into an interview? Can you get them out of that moment and back into their full power, out of their amygdala response and back into their embodied presence? So we talked about a lot of things: intervening, inviting people to speak, amplifying their voices, referring and encouraging them to lead, recognizing power dynamics and changing them, speaking up and advocating for systemic change, right? So you have the power to advocate for systemic change in your work. And if you feel like you don't, you also rethink the work that you do regularly so that it's more equitable and accessible. We all have some power to create change. Allyship can change somebody's life significantly. In education, in hiring, in promotion, and leadership, these are big kind of areas where you can change somebody's life. So think about mentoring, sponsoring, teaching, volunteering. And then also think about how you can help build allies as well. How can you continue to grow allyship, use that privilege that you have to bring allies to the table. And then lastly, correct those systemic inequities in the workplace, whether that's hiring, pay, promotion, leadership. We've talked about a lot of that in the last episode with Rachel Williams. And then I'm just going to end here with Brené Brown. Integrity is choosing courage over comfort. It's choosing it's choosing right over what's fun, fast, or easy, and it's practicing your values, not just professing them. So it's not enough to profess them, it's action. And it takes all of us, and it takes all of us creating change together. So think today, what commitment could you make to, what action will you take as a result of some of the things that you've heard today? What's something that you learned that can really make a difference in somebody else's life? And I invite you, if you feel comfortable enough, all this is about, embracing some discomfort. So if there is something that you really heard and an aha moment that you really had, please let me know in the chat. And then I'm going to just jump to Q&A here, I think. Can't see the Q&A for some reason. Sorry, you all. Antonia, would you mind just putting the Q&A in the chat for me really quickly? The final stage of allyship is activism. That's Robert asked that question. So, the first question, and forgive me, I don't see the names of who asked this question. How does one find more people who are deniers and start educating them on learning about DEI? Yeah, and it's been difficult for me to have conversations with people who aren't interested. Yeah, that's I do a lot of work with ERGs and with people that are DEI teams that are working to create change. And this is the hardest one and I think you have to decide for yourself if you want to work on the deniers, or there's so many other people that are a little bit further along. So the observers and the learners are much easier to work with, because generally somebody who's denying it needs to have their own aha moment. You can't really create that for them. So I would actually, I know this is not maybe the answer that you're looking for, but I would encourage you perhaps to look at the observers and the learners and really focus on them and how you can give them the information that they need to become an ally. Rather than focus on the deniers, because it is so hard to change them, and it's not you that's going to change them. They have to have some other aha moment that's bigger. So fighting is not going to get them there. This next question, I agree with the do not interrupt. In practice, there are so I agree with the do not interrupt. In practice, though, there are high needs individuals that can take hours to discuss things. The ideas are important, but it is difficult in a workday to spend hours with one person. Do you have any ideas on maintaining respect while producing respectful boundaries? Aha, yeah, I think it's developing some meeting norms. So the idea would be that everybody gets an equal time at the table, right? And so how can you create some meeting norms where that is the case, whether that is recognizing that, each person gets a minute to talk through their ideas, or, some other way to create a process around that. Because once you have a process, then you can point to that process and say, hey, that our process is this, and thank you for your time, and we need to keep moving. Adrienne asks, thank you so much for this. You're welcome. How do we become an advocate and try to implement small changes in companies if you're not an executive, but rather an administrative staff member? Yeah. what are the things that are in your realm? One is, can you redesign your work to be more inclusive? If you already done that, advocating. So we've had a lot of companies reaching out to us lately around consulting and training, and they are doing it because their people internally, their staff, their employees have asked them to. So ask them to create change and really make your feelings known, make your desire for change known, really push for change inside the company. You may not be able to do it yourself, but companies are listening right now. Sarah asks, my company is trying to be more inclusive in hiring. How can I provide a call to action for candidates that would make them more comfortable applying? Yeah, we don't have much time left. So unfortunately, I can't address this too much except to say that if they're not applying, it's something that you're doing in terms of outreach. You're not reaching and finding them where they are, or in your messaging, in your job descriptions, on your website. How are you writing those job descriptions in a way that's inviting them? How are you writing messages on your website in a way that is inviting people, diverse people, underrepresented people, to feel like they're going to a place where they belong and where they can thrive? So that is all the time I have. I know there were a couple of more questions, and if you message me on social media, I will answer them. I will make that commitment to you. So if you find me on Twitter, just DM me. My DM should be open, and ask me, and I'm happy to answer more questions. All right, everybody. Allyship is a journey. We have focused on this for 16 weeks. Do something different, make a change, big or small, take one action, then another to create change. We are going to take a 4-week break, but we'll be back September 1st. So look for social media, and we'll also email everybody when we start back up. In the meantime, check out the past podcasts. They're available on all major podcast channels. And thank you for joining us. Join us starting September 1st for Leading with Empathy and Allyship Season 2. You can catch podcasts and videos and stay in the loop by going to changecatalyst.co, changecatalyst.co. Sign up for our newsletter, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. And thanks everybody for joining us, for all your questions, for introducing yourselves, for making a difference. Really appreciate you all, and it has been amazing to be here with you. All right. You're welcome, Colin, Carrie, Colin, Erica, Rita. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye. Stay safe.